Welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Max Mueller, who was a pioneer in the study of comparative religions and the study of the academic study of religions, once said, "He who knows one knows none." Well, he was talking about religion, of course, and his notion was that in order to better understand one's own religion, it's good to study all religions or a variety of the diverse religions of the world. My guest today, Julia Roberts, has been undertaking her own study of diversity of cultures in Asia. And among that study has been a study of the diverse religions of Japan. Julia, I'm happy to have you here, and I'm anxious to hear about some of your experiences and what you think about this notion of studying diverse religions in order to better understand your own. So welcome today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this important subject.
Great. Yeah, so Julia and I have been reading this book called Holy Envy by Barbara Brown Taylor. And one of the themes of that book is that one can better understand their own faith through the study of other religions. And that's a notion that maybe is not popular or that is not often considered. So Julia, I'm just wondering, what do you think about this idea that one can better understand their own religious commitments, their own religious faith through the study of how other people believe and what other people believe?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with that passion that Barbara Brown Taylor has for this notion in the book. She's really she seems to have this view that by appreciating every person and the way that they interact with the world and coming to peace with that and not being defensive over differences, but feeling that everyone has something to contribute to what it means to be human, to coming to peace with that, we can learn from others then. Once we surrender that defensiveness, we can see the beauty that others possess in difference and take that into our own lives. And I definitely, through my own personal experiences, believe that that is a very valuable way to see the world and to encounter difference. And as our world becomes more and more globalized, that is certainly something we need to become comfortable with, is people who see differently than we do.
Yeah, it seems like this might be a really timely message right now, given some of the turmoil that our own society is going through. It strikes me that if people can make the attempt to better understand something as deeply personal as religious faith, that would be a great step toward creating a more tolerant society. So when let's just hear a little bit about what you've been up to the past year, because you, in the effort to kind of expose yourself, I think, to a different type of culture and to a greater diversity of worldviews, you really took a big step. So just give us an update on what you've been up to for the past year.
Sure. So I picked myself up out of my home culture of kind of southern Appalachia, and I plopped down in Sapporo, Japan. Sapporo is the biggest city on the northern island of Hokkaido in Japan. And I was able to work there and live there for 1 year as an English teacher of junior high school students. And during that time, my goal was really just to do as much as possible to get a taste of what Japanese culture might be about, and how those the average Japanese person interacts with the world differently or in similar ways to how the average Appalachian person might or American might. And so, it was just a journey of self-discovery through observation of another place and another way of life. So.
Yeah. And of course, your journey of self-discovery was made more challenging by the fact that we had a global pandemic hit while you were pretty much alone in a very different part of the world. So we're glad to have you home safely now. What do you think was the most valuable part of your experience while you were in Japan?
I think, having the opportunity to actually work in a Japanese work environment, surrounded by coworkers who were Japanese in nationality, really challenged me to understand or to experience and process how another culture really can be extremely different from my own. I think when you're forced into an environment, well, I mean, I optionally went, but when you're integrated into this environment and you have to, there's nothing familiar there, and you're challenged constantly with these interactions where the cultural rules that and the rules that you've been taught from childhood that guide these interactions, when those rules are suddenly they don't apply, and you're lost in these interactions of what this person means and how to problem solve and how to go through the day-to-day life with people who see the world differently. It really challenges you. And so I think that was, it's often when people go abroad, they surround themselves intentionally or unintentionally. They tend to surround themselves with people who are similar to them. So expats or people from their own culture who are living there abroad. And by having to work in a Japanese work environment, I was disconnected from the familiar and totally submerged in a very different environment, and had to come to face to face every day with a different situation, different scenario that I didn't know how to navigate based on my own cultural upbringing and my own socialization. And so I think that was extremely valuable, and gives you a lot of empathy for the experiences of immigrants. And it's good to be humbled regularly and realize that and you don't know as much as you think you do.
Well, that sounds like a great experience, a very challenging experience. And of course, as I listen to you talk about kind of having day-to-day challenges with different expectations and different ways of being in the world, of course, one of the things that define us as human beings is our kind of religious commitments and our ways of being religious in the world. So I'm guessing that you had some chance to at least think about, if not study, religion and Japanese culture. And I'm just curious, how would you describe the relationship between Japanese culture and religion? Is it a more secular society than, say, the U.S., or do religious commitments run deep in Japan? Is it something that you see in everyday life? Those sorts of observations would be interesting. Yeah,
I love this question. I feel like I'm going to be just slightly evasive on it, because I'm not sure we can compare apples to apples here. My experience in Japan with religion, though I was only there for a year, was that the way that the average Japanese citizen interacts with religion and conceives of religious life is just so different from the way that the average Southerner in America might experience it. And so to say that it's secular from the perspective of the American South, yes, I would say they're much more secular in the day-to-day life. It doesn't seem like the average Japanese person would have religion on the front of their mind. The rhetoric of the politicians isn't as, religiously entwined. They're not constantly, referring to God or the morality of the faith, or, the day-to-day life and the rhetoric of politics both seemed more secular. However, I think it just the way that religion is, it seemed experienced in Japan is it's just so closely tied to national and community identity. And so insofar as a Japanese person feels like I am Japanese, and that's an important part of the way I interact with the world, is I am a Japanese person, that means that I am Shinto and Buddhist, or that means I go to temples on New Year's and make a wish for health for my family and success in the new year. That means that I am less likely to be Christian, because Christian is Western. Christian means not Japanese. And so, I think it's from a perspective of the American, yes, they seem more secular, but I'm not sure that they experience it in that way. Religion it isn't the same. It's not necessarily a personal experience as much as a connection to a community and an identity. And it's quite different. I can't quite get my head around it.
It sounds like, let me make a stab at it. Whereas an American looking at Japanese culture might not see the overt expression of religion, as we would in the South. And I like your touchstone to the South. Flannery O'Connor said the South was Christ haunted. So whereas maybe religion in Japan is not so overt, it's integrated into every aspect of life. At this level, it sounds like that's what you're suggesting. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. And, the indigenous religion of Japan, or what's considered the indigenous religion of Japan, being Shinto, that has a really interesting history in modern times with Japan, too, where throughout World War II and the time of more Japanese imperialism, the government found it ideal to connect the national image and pride of and the divinity of their emperor to their native religion. And so there's a really interesting relationship between religion and everyday life and self-perception of their nation. And it's not been totally sorted out, because the way that the average Japanese citizen processes what World War II was hasn't been totally sorted out. So yeah, it's a very, religion just is experienced differently, I think.
That's really an interesting observation you make there, making the connection between imperialism, still the kind of, I guess, attempt to process what happened during the Second World War, and the role that religion played in that. It's very complex. Now, you mentioned Shinto as the kind of indigenous religion in Japan. That's something that most Americans have probably not heard of. Buddha, that's the recognizable term, but Shinto, being generally the religion that's associated with Japan, how would you describe Shinto to our viewers who maybe don't have any familiarity with that religion?
Sure. I will give my best description of it as somebody who experienced it from the outside. Anytime an observer tries to describe a religion, they can't totally grasp what it means to the average layperson. But what I observed is that it's the myths associated with Shintoism about gods in the beginning who created the earth, that those are deeply, deeply connected to the Japanese mythology of their nation. And so some of the important religious sites in Shintoism happen to be some of the most important sites in Japan. So, for example, the Ise Shrine is considered one of the holiest places in Japan, and it's a very important spot for imperial events. Like kind of this, again, this kind of uncertain, ambiguous connection between state and religion, and present identity and past conception of themselves and their identity and their origins. But in the everyday experience, it seems it's this idea that every person, every thing in nature has sort of a spirit, and they call it kami, which tends to translate in English to God, but it's sort of a mistranslation, or it's an imperfect translation, because we think of God as an all-powerful thing, perhaps more omniscient, and the kami, I think, is a bit more a spirit. So you'll be walking down a country road, and you'll come to a little shrine that's been set up in front of a very large boulder. And the shrine will have certain signs of Shintoism. There's often a braided rope or white papers. There's maybe some rice wine, or certain symbols important to Shinto religion, but it'll be set up, this altar will be set up in front of, or shrine will be set up in front of this natural phenomenon, this large rock or this large tree. And the idea is that that large item embodied in that is a spirit, a kami, and by having the shrine and paying semi-regular tribute to the kami through this shrine, you can hopefully appease that spirit and bring good fortune to your village or your family. So in the everyday experience, again, more traditional Japanese people might have a miniature shrine, Shinto shrine in their own home, and might make regular tributes, regular offerings to this shrine for peace and harmony in their home and safety in their home.
It sounds, as I listen to you talk, I'm reminded of what we do sometimes when we study Western religious traditions, and it sounds to me like that. And this may be an overgeneralization, but in Western religious traditions, and I'm thinking particularly the Abrahamic religions, tendency to separate reality into those things that are sacred and those things that are not sacred, are profane.
Right.
And that religion kind of gets compartmentalized. To me, like your description here of kind of Japanese culture and maybe Eastern religions in general, is that the spiritual traditions and religious traditions are very much more a part of kind of everyday experience, and that there's not so much of a kind of dualism there that separates the sacred from the rest of life. Is that resonating at all?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder, I feel like it's maybe more that the sacred is in the community, the sacred is around you, and the focus is that you're integrated into that, all that's around you all the time. Whereas there's this dualism within Western traditions that sort of self and inside and out. This separates who I am, my inside, the Cartesian, is that what it is? This idea that who's inside, and it's me and my personal self and the world around me, and that's the dualism. And so the way that we tend to in the West approach, or Abrahamic traditions, perhaps, I can't speak too much to Islam, but this idea of a personal faith being, something that's experienced by the self, and it's very personal and individual. And so to me, that's a more significant dualism that I would see, and difference between Western religion and Japanese religion. But yeah, I haven't teased that out. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, I want to shift gears just a little bit here. You meant, even though Shinto is the kind of indigenous religion, you mentioned that Buddhism also has a presence in Japan. And then you kind of implied that there's more kind of generic nature religions that have presence there too. Maybe it's influence of Taoism from China. It sounds like there's perhaps some cultural borrowing going on when it comes to religion between Japan and China. Is that the case?
From what I've read, from what I've heard, that's absolutely the case, which is really interesting. I mean, I think Shintoism is considered indigenous, meaning, the earlier peoples that were there, which is a bit actually not even straightforward, because there are multiple indigenous groups within what's present day Japan. Okinawa and Hokkaido had different groups of people than who's sort of on mainland Japan. But anyways, the indigenous religion of Japan being Shintoism, but through trade and interactions with through Korea and Japan and China, Buddhism, as well as some Confucian values, the writing system, many of the staples of Japanese culture today came through trade with China and interaction with China and Korea. So religion is absolutely one of those. Buddhism is not indigenous to Japan. But I mean, how much in life is something we hold that's only ours? I mean, the world is constantly an exchange of ideas, and tracing back the original location of something, an idea or a value, is hard to do. But yeah, so I think there's definitely the roots of Japanese Buddhism today come from China. I think the evidence of Buddhism today within Japan, Buddhism is broken off into lots of different sects and lots of different interpretations of the same sort of principles. And one of the most famous being Zen Buddhism, because of the beautiful gardens that Japan's famous for, that sort of grew out of sort of a meditational practice, I guess. But in the everyday life, Buddhism people tend to go to Buddhism for their important ceremonies, especially end of life, funerals. Japanese people tend to go to Buddhist temples in order to have the end of life rituals performed. And then many traditional Japanese people will also have an altar, a Buddhist altar in their home that is set up to honor their ancestors. And so daily, often they will make an offering to their ancestors through this Buddhist altar in their home. So Buddhism is very much a part of Japan. I think the statistic I'd found on the CIA World Fact Book says that Buddhism is actually almost 67% of the population identify as Buddhist.
Well, I'm fascinated listening to you describe kind of what I would call religious identity. So I want to try a statement out with you and see what you think. So in America or in the West, if someone were to ask you about religion, you might self-identify as a Christian or as Jewish or as Muslim or whatever your faith is. But it sounds like that in Japan, it's a much more kind of syncretic thing that you might not self-identify as Buddhist or Shinto, but that these religions function at different points in life and do different things. So you might, as you said, go to a Buddhist temple for end of life, but in your everyday life, you might pass a Shinto shrine and pay attention to that. And it sounds like the Confucian idea of filial piety, this kind of ancestor veneration, is alive and well too. So is that a fair statement that a person in Japan may not identify religiously like someone in the West would?
That's one of my favorite facts about Japan. I'm absolutely fascinated by that idea and how different it is from the way I've experienced religion in America, because the statistics just are so unusual that I mentioned that 67% of the people in Japan identify as Buddhist, but actually, in fact, 79% identify as Shinto. And that in itself adds up to over 100%. So that means you ask somebody, they don't feel wedded to just one single religion, and that's not some exclusive identity that, because of the ideology of that religion, prevents you from identifying with anything else. They can come together, and a person can, with integrity, say, I am both Shinto and Buddhist, and those can work together. And they've found a way to integrate those ideas to where they don't conflict internally, which I think is so fascinating. So yes, and what that looks like, in the everyday is, so you might, for marriage, maybe you'll have a marriage in the Shinto shrine, which will be the very traditional Japanese wedding. And then you might also have a wedding in these funny little wedding chapel things that are hilarious. They're all over Japan, because the imagery of a Western wedding with the white dress and the groom dressed up and the preacher giving the vows in a beautiful church with flowers, that's an idea that they really love. So you might have your wedding in the Shinto shrine and then go have your other sort of Western wedding in your wedding dress in the wedding chapel, and both would be fine. And then when you have your first child, maybe you'll go to, on the important dates, you maybe go to the Shinto shrine for blessings. When you get a new car, you'll go to a Shinto shrine for a blessing, for safety. But then, when end of life time comes, whatever, you'll tend to go to a Buddhist temple in order to get that sorted out. And all of these things can integrate every single day. And I think that's amazing.
That sounds like the kind of most important takeaway you got from your experience, at least in regards to religion and the way religion functions in life. I find that really fascinating. We've got about a minute left or so. I'd like to hear about your future plans, because I know you're going to be a graduate student, and tell us a little bit about what you're going to do. And do you envision yourself continuing a formal study of religion in your graduate studies?
Yes, so I'm about to start a master's program in social anthropology, and my interest in social anthropology is sort of comparative. So looking especially at Japanese culture and comparing it to American culture. And those culture is kind of a difficult term. There's a lot of diversity and a lot of movement within any set culture. It's not a locked in idea, but in general, comparing American culture to, in general, Japanese culture, and looking at especially how individuals find meaning and navigate the difficult decisions in life and the big questions in life. And that's my passion. And religion is, completely intertwined with that. You can't, humans, when they look at life and they try to decide how to make good decisions and how to be their best self, religion is a really important part of how they navigate that. So I would really like to do comparative religious studies as well as comparative ethics with my career. So this is, I'm definitely a novice right now, but having this experience in Japan has taught me a lot about just how different, how vast the human experience really is. And by looking at it closely and tilting your head a lot and questioning, that you can better understand yourself and it's a rich process. So I encourage everyone who watches this to take a step back and see what other cultures and other religions can teach them and challenge them about their own faiths, for sure.
I think that's a great last statement, and I don't want to leave without recognizing that you're going to be a graduate student in King's College at Cambridge University, right?
Yes, Trinity College, Cambridge, yes.
Trinity College, okay. So, of course, a great university with a great tradition. And I kind of fully expect you to continue with your PhD, and maybe you can come back to Appalachian someday and join us on the faculty.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hopefully being a teacher and doing a lot more of these sorts of conversations about the role of religion in life. So.
Well, thank you, Julia. This was a fascinating conversation. We, of course, wish you well in your future endeavors, and I appreciate you taking the time today to join us.
I'm honored to have been asked. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you. And that's it for this week for Religion and Life. I hope you'll join us next week here on App TV for another episode of Religion and Life. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.